Hello and welcome back to another episode of Is a Deviant, where we're doing a book review. Today we're going to talk about the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. It was all the rage a few years ago. I want to say 2020, maybe 2021. And I read it on vacation, actually. I think in 2022. And it's a really good book. It's a love story. It is the Song of Achilles. Okay, start from the beginning. Song of Achilles, I basically took it because I really was interested in the myth of Achilles. And I don't know if you're familiar with the myth, but it's basically like Achilles is this child of a goddess and a king, and basically he was created between the goddess Thetis, I can't say it properly, and the king of Pythia. And then he did a lot of really exciting things, and he was basically foretold to be the key factor in winning the Trojan War. And he was going to be a huge, most successful soldier ever. Like, he was going to be the best soldier that you've ever seen, and he is going to be godlike, basically. He's not a god, but he's like a half god. And he was foretold to be like this most amazing victor ever. So however, Thetis was also told by an oracle, this is the myth basically, that he will die on the battlefield. And Thetis, being his mom, of course, didn't want her child to die, you know. So she, and this is also part of the myth, the original, well, there are a lot of retellings of the myth. It's not really sure what is original because the myth keeps getting changed, as does happen with myths. So, yeah, so basically, in this case, it's just the most recent retelling is basically that Thetis didn't want her child to die, so she basically, the oracle told her that her child would die on the battlefield, and she wanted to avoid this, and then she took Achilles to the river in the underworld called Styx, and she dunked him into the river, holding him up by his heel, and basically dunking his entire body into the water, so he would become invulnerable, because it made him invulnerable. Basically, he couldn't be killed anymore because nothing could penetrate his skin, and he couldn't die. However, she was holding him by his heel, dunking him into the water, meaning where she was holding him on the heel, no water actually touched his heel. That is why his only vulnerable place became his heel, the Achilles heel, which is basically also one of the sayings nowadays, you know, like if something is your weak point, it is your Achilles heel. And that's also where that comes from that myth, right? And basically, this myth has been retold many times. I think the most famous work is in the Iliad from Homer. And it's very old, been retold many times. It's the focus of a lot of movies, books. It keeps getting retold in different ways, and this is basically a new retelling of the story. It is, as far as I can tell, as, of course, not being a Greek ancient mythology scientist or something. I didn't study it. I was very interested in it. Like, as a kid, I was pretty obsessed with all the myths and stuff, especially the Greek and Egyptian myths and stuff. So there was a time where I knew more than I know now. I forgot a lot about it, but I thought it was always very interesting. And that's also why I grabbed this book, because it was the Song of Achilles. And I thought, like, oh, cool, it's a modern retelling of the Achilles tales. And yes and no. Basically, first of all, you have like this little guy here, bow and arrow, that looks like a heart. So it already shows you that it is a love story. And Madeline Miller was actually the winner of the Women's Prize. Like, she won a prize on this book. And it's very well written. Like, it has an unusual style in the beginning where I was a little put off at first because it wasn't the typical, oh, here you have a house, the house is white, the house has a brown roof, and two different stories. In the first story, you found, you know, like, it's very descriptive of what is happening. That's kind of a typical description that you get in average books. And here it's more like she's telling with emotion, right? She is telling, oh, the warm summer shimmered over the beach and everything tasted of honey and figs and that kind of stuff. Like she's mostly telling with senses and with like emotions and feelings and that kind of stuff, and not super descriptive. So in the beginning it was a little bit of getting used to, but once you got into it after a few pages, it's actually quite nice. And funnily enough, I thought the story was going to be told by Achilles, but it is not. It is told by Patroclus, which is an exiled prince from a neighboring kingdom of Pythia. And he basically, I'm going to go into all detail, by the way, so full of spoilers, I'll write it in the description because I'm going to just tell everything. So basically, at a young age, he killed another kid on accident. Like, he didn't mean to, but the kid died. And the kid was bullying him and whatever, and then he kind of pushed him, and he fell, hit his head on a rock, and died. And Patroclus, like, apologized profusely many times, like he didn't mean to, and it was, like, not on purpose, and all those kind of things. And they didn't really care, like the townspeople. They wanted retribution. They wanted anything. They wanted him to pay the price. And his father was disappointed at him because he didn't own up to it, in the sense of, you should be proud that you killed somebody that was harming you or that was not doing you any good. And I think that's kind of wild, right? Because that's crazy. Like, oh, you are not proud of killing this kid. How dare you? You should be stronger. You should be more manly. And Patroclus is just not that kind of guy. He's like, well, but I didn't want to kill anybody. And the father is just like, you're a disgrace. You're not fit to be king. You're not fit to be my heir. I will exile you and strip you of your rank. And then he basically sent him to Pythia to live with the king of Pythia as a guest on his, how do you say? Like, in his presence. And the king of Pythia had a son, and the son was named Achilles. And at this point, we are reading everything from the perspective of Patroclus, so he doesn't really know that Achilles was born of Thetis, right? He finds out pretty quickly, but something was off about this Achilles dude. And Achilles was naturally charismatic. He was gorgeous. He had very telling, like, golden orange hair, I think it's called many times. And it looks kind of like polished bronze. And he had captivating eyes. And he was overall very good looking. And he was naturally charming. And everybody was wanting to be around him all the time, wanted to be his friend all the time. Like, everybody loved this guy. And Patroclus was just, like, kind of on the edge, in the corner, always sitting with them. He was just always kind of watching and not judging, but kind of, like, gauging the situation. He wasn't super into it. Like, classically, I would describe Patroclus as an introvert, to be honest. And, but Achilles caught his eye. Like, he was always looking at him, and he was fascinated by him in a way that he couldn't explain. And Achilles seemed to be fascinated by Patroclus as well. And Patroclus, of his own description, described himself as very scrawny, not very interesting. He had average looks, average hair, like he didn't have anything that made him stand out all too much. So he was surprised that Achilles noticed his existence at all. And throughout the first happenings, like, he lives on this with this king for a while, and then he gets closer with Achilles, and they hang out a lot, and they become really good friends, and they feel a closeness to each other that they don't feel with anybody else. And then you can kind of guess, like, I don't think you're just friends, that kind of thing. And the way also women are described in this book was slightly upsetting to me in the beginning. I understand it's ancient Greece and whatever, and women didn't have any rights and whatnot, and they were just objects to be used and disposed of, and that kind of stuff. Like, there are strong women characters, like Thetis as well, but there is a very brutal scene described by Thetis herself. I can't remember who described the scene, about how Thetis was taken against her will by the king to create Achilles. And basically, the king also got this. He didn't want to do that either. He basically got the calling, or like the task by the oracles, I think, because they needed Achilles. They needed Achilles to be born so that they could have this warrior to win the Trojan War for them, which wasn't going to happen at that point. Nobody knew the Trojan War was coming. It's basically all the oracles and the gods in the background knowing. They were spinning the yarn of fate, basically, and of history. And it's pretty brutal to read sometimes, like the way the women are treated and that kind of stuff. It is not for the faint of heart. I have to say that right away. It's not super detailed, but because, like I said, she doesn't go into detail. She goes more into the emotional connection to the scene, or like any kind of color and sense and feelings and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and it's kind of harsh to read every now and again how these women are being treated. So just warning for you, first of all, you have homosexual love, of course. Like you have men and men loving each other. You have women being treated poorly, you know. And so if you don't like any of that, I wouldn't recommend the book. For me, I don't mind reading that. I'm not super happy the way the women are handled, but I also am understanding that that's just how it was, right? That's just how it happened. It's just it is a very gruesome but also very empathetic way of showing it, in my opinion. I thought it was done very well. And basically, back to the plot line, so Patroclus and Achilles grow up in Pythia together, and then at some point when Achilles turns 15 or something, or 16, he is taken into the mountains to be taught to be a warrior by this centaur, whose name I cannot pronounce, and I'm so sorry. I think it's Cheiron or Cherion or something. I cannot say it. I'm so sorry. It kind of sounds like Chevron, but it's not Chevron. Like, you know. And yeah, basically he trains him to become like the best warrior, like for running and throwing spears and everything. Like he trains him, and Patroclus was first not allowed to go with him, but he just followed him, and he's like, I'm going with, like, you're not gonna stop me. And then Chevron basically didn't tell him to go away. He's just like, okay, whatever, it's how it is now, but you shut the fuck up and stay out of the way. And he trained a little bit with him, but of course he was nowhere near Achilles' physical abilities, because he's more than human, right? He's faster, he has better reflexes and everything, so Patroclus cannot keep up. It's just not possible. And that's like most of the first half of the book, and then at some point they get together on the mountain, and then it becomes a romance between the two of them. And they start out in their romantic journey in the beginning, and basically toward the outside, they always mark it as that Patroclus is basically Achilles' most trusted advisor and like his best friend that he always has at his side to basically advise him on whatever. Because Patroclus, even though he is not significant in this kind of sense as a warrior, he is very wise. And he's very observant. So he's pretty smart, actually. And, but it's never about him. Like, the whole story is told from his perspective, but it's not ever about him or what he can do until it is, right? It's very, very interesting, because the book itself is very well researched, in my opinion, because a lot of things happen in this book that also happen in the myth that is publicly known. Like the Thetis thing, like being born of the goddess of the ocean and the king of Pythia, and then being trained on the mountain by the centaur, and then what are all the other things that happen? Like, there's a lot that's happening in that book. Like, it's quite a story, and it goes on for quite a while. I think the entire book spans over like 20 years or something, and maybe 20 years, I don't know. And then basically it continues on, and then the entire thing around the Trojan War is starting to happen. So basically, there are these different kings and different queens, and then there is like this, the House of Troy basically has a few sons, and they want to marry them off to some queens, and this one woman is really in love with one of the sons, and he's in love with her as well, but they choose not to marry. Like, she chooses a different guy. And then after marrying, I'm very sorry if this is not super historically accurate, but I remember looking this up, and it was actually pretty accurate. And then she basically runs away from this king that she didn't want to marry, but married for some reason. And then I think it was for political reasons. And then she ran back to this Prince of Troy who she actually loved. And the story is marketed by the king's house that the king of Troy, who then became a king of Troy because he was a prince, right? He became a king of Troy, stole the wife of the neighboring kingdom, and that he was basically keeping her hostage in his city, like in his castle. And in the book, it's very well done because you basically have the perspective of like the foot soldiers that run around, like everybody, your average Joe, but you do know like the royals, like you kind of know them because of Achilles, so Achilles has to do with them all the time. And then Patroclus like kind of watches all of these things happen because he was also at that wife's auction basically, where all of these wives were choosing the kings and the other way around. And Patroclus' dad was basically trying to force him to marry somebody who was like literally 14, so he was like, I'm a child, I can't marry anyone. I think he wasn't even 14, I think he was maybe 12, like he was a kid. And then the king was like, oh, I'm disappointed that you didn't choose a wife. And he's like, I am a child, like, I don't know what you want from me, I can barely make a sandwich. And yeah, and that was like the beginning of the king, like Patroclus' own dad, not liking him anymore. He didn't like him from the beginning because he was like scrawny and small anyway, and not the kind of man he was envisioning as his son. And yeah, and during this auction, Patroclus remembered all of this. Like, he remembered that the queen decided for the other guy, even though she was clearly in love with this one guy, and then that she ran away to the king of Troy, who was the person she actually loved and whatever. And then you kind of realize, it's never said per se, but the reader realizes, oh, she ran away because she didn't like being married to this one dude. And then, but the other kingdoms were all saying that the king of Troy was holding her hostage, so they have like the grounds to go against him and wage war against Troy. Like, that was what they wanted to do, and this was a perfect, reason to go. It's not like, oh, we want his stuff. It's like, oh, he stole our queen, we need to get her back. And then and then they basically go to war against Troy. And this is where the book has like its last third. A lot of things happen in between. I can't even say all of it because it would take too long. But it's very close to the actual myth of Achilles. So it's actually really well researched, in my opinion. It's very well written. The love story is absolutely heart-wrenching, like completely heart-wrenching. I was weeping at the end. It was so sad. Because in the end, basically they all lay siege on Troy, which takes, I think, a decade on its own. Like, I think that takes 10 years itself. And Patroclus and Achilles in this time lived together in a tent and whatever, and while they were like they are pillaging all the villagers around, right, so they can't get any resources, and they're trying to starve out Troy. And of course they take all the women from these villages and auction them off on camp, so every man can have however many women he pleases. And the brightest warriors, they get to have first pick. And then there was this woman who was incredibly beautiful and gorgeous, and the king who didn't like Achilles, the king leading the battle basically, who didn't like Achilles and was a disgusting old man, he was very greedy in that sense. Like, he took most of the women that he wanted, and a lot of them were very young. And then there was this gorgeous woman standing on stage who had a natural authority and elegance about her that You couldn't really, like, she looked like royalty, but she was not a royal person. And Patroclus, for some reason, was like, Achilles, you have to take her. And Achilles like, but I don't want, I don't know if you've been with me for the last few years, but I'm not interested in women, you know? And he's like, no, 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 but the king can't have her. Trust me, he can't have her. You know what he's going to do to her. We don't want this. Please just take her. And then since Achilles is the honor warrior, of course, everyone's always praising Achilles and he's always the first to run into battle and whatever. Like, he is the star of the show for years and years and years. And the king hates him for it, right? Because he's jealous. And then Achilles says, I want this woman. And the king was like, oh, actually, I was gonna take her, and it's the king's right to take what he wants, since he's like the leader of the whole battalion siege thing. And, but it would also be incredibly rude to refuse the star warrior spoils of war, because that's also his right, because he was first kill, first on the battlefield. So he has the honor of also taking first pick. And the king can refuse him, but it would be incredibly insulting. And he would be actually making a lot of people who are rallying behind Achilles because they love him more than the king turn against him. So he's like, okay, well, fine, you can have her, you know, but he was really not happy with it. And then they took her in. And they brought her to their tent, and of course she was like going crazy. She's like, oh my god, I know exactly what you're gonna do to me. And she was like trying to fight against it, and Patroclus was like, oh my god, we're not interested in you that way. And then he just grabbed Achilles and like gave him a huge kiss and whatever. And she's like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, we just thought you were cool, wanna hang out kind of deal. You know, and then just like fake in front of everybody that you're with Achilles and whatever. So Achilles is no longer questioned in his love for women, because like over the book, everyone is just always like, oh yeah, you have, you know, you're close with young men, you know, like what did I do with my wink? Yeah. Like wink wink, you know, like we've all been there, but you know, you want a woman in the end. And Achilles like, yeah, sure, I'll get one. I just haven't found one that I like. And then they got her, and she lived in like an adjacent tent to theirs. They just kind of put the tents together. And then he basically had a wife, so everyone would shut the fuck up. So yeah, it was pretty funny. And then the end of the book was actually really crazy, because it's just like the last few years around Troy and how they just can't seem to get them down and just can't seem to kill them, and they are trying to starve them out and it's not working and all that kind of stuff. And then I don't even remember what turn of events led to it. I think someone was saying how useless Patroclus is and he has no place here. And then Patroclus was so tired of everything being as it is, and he was always scared that Achilles wouldn't come home, you know, because it was the love of his life. Like, he didn't want to lose him under any circumstance. And then, since it's been a while since I read the book, I can't remember what moved him to go onto the damn battlefield, but this boy donned armor, and he donned Achilles' armor. Oh yes, because he remembered Thetis actually went to him. She hated Patroclus, by the way. Hated him. Holy shit, she hated him so bad. And there's like this whole sidebar that happened before they even went to Troy, where Achilles was like forced on this island full of women and had to dress as a woman to like be hidden away from the war. And he was also married off to the princess of the island and had a baby with her, because his mom literally stood in the room and forced him to have a baby with her. Like, it's fucking wild. Like, you need to imagine this. Like, oh my god, I could not perform. Like, what the hell? But and she basically forced him onto this girl, and this girl also wanted like to be, oh, I want to be Achilles' wife. Like, that, do you imagine the honor? Like, she wanted that so bad. And then they produced a child together, and this child, immediately after birth, was whisked away by Thetis into the sea, where he would be raised by her properly, because it was not done properly with Achilles. And then Achilles left the island to move on to Troy anyway. And it was actually quite awful, because this poor girl basically sacrificed everything. She sacrificed marriage and she produced a baby and whatever, and then the baby was taken from her. Achilles was taken from her, and she was never allowed to say that she was married to Achilles ever. So the only thing she did to marry with him, for the whole reason she did it for, was gone all of a sudden. So it's like, damn, like that poor girl. I feel really bad for her because she just wanted a piece of the fame. I mean, shouldn't do anything for fame, to be honest, but whatever. And it's wild. It's a wild book. Like, the whole Achilles myth is already crazy, so the book is really well done, like very well written, very well researched. Can definitely recommend. And in the end, Patroclus basically sacrifices himself because there was a champion on the Trojan side that said he would face off against Achilles and he will kill him. Like, that was the oracle's prediction. But the oracle's prediction was not that specific. It said, I think an arrow will pierce Achilles' heel and he will die. And there was this guy who shot arrows who was really, really good at it on Troy's side. So everyone just assumed he was the guy from the oracle. And then Patroclus, because he didn't want Achilles to be slain, he basically woke up really early. He donned Achilles' entire armor, because he had his own signature armor, right? And he donned it and went onto the battlefield, and he fought his way all the way to the wall of Troy, basically. So he ran the whole way, and he actually killed some people, and he managed to make it there. And a lot of people thought he was Achilles because he was wearing Achilles' armor, and then he made it all the way, and then the champion comes out and kills him. Like, I'm not even joking. The main character who's telling the book dies 2 chapters or something before the end of the book. And the heart-wrenching part was basically that these beautiful lovers that you grow really close to over the span of the book are separated now by death. And Patroclus dies on the battlefield, but the thing is, he's not gone, his soul kind of resides close by, because they made like a graveyard where they bury all of the fallen warriors, and he was buried there as well. But in an unmarked grave, like, nobody knew where the guy was, because Thetis hated him so much that she didn't allow him to be buried with honor. And then Achilles was torn apart. Like, he was so sad, and he was completely not himself anymore. Like, he turned into this raging maniac, completely torn apart by grief, and he didn't care about anything anymore. He didn't care about the stupid war, about his stupid mom, about his stupid Troy, whatever. He didn't care about the oracle. He didn't care about anything. He threw himself onto the battlefield every single day, hoping someone will finally kill him so he will be done with this, and he can join Patroclus in the afterside, in the other side, afterlife. Yeah. And it didn't work for years. Like, I think it was a whole other 2 years at the end, where champion after champion was thrown at Achilles, and he just slayed all of them without any real effort, and nobody could kill him, and he was just so tired of living, he didn't want to be there anymore. And then finally, this is all told in like shorthand, like it's very shortly written, like it's kind of summarized basically at the end, because it wasn't that important anymore. And finally he dies and is buried at a very big monument, very honorable and everything. And Thetis basically visits the grave, and she is looking at the grave of her son, who she completely was very sad that he died, of course, and that she saw that no matter what she tried, she could not escape the oracle, and she could not escape her son being slain, because that's just what was supposed to happen. It's just how it is. It's fate. There was nothing she could change about it, no matter how hard she tried. And then she felt like a presence around the graveyard that was basically not dead, but not here anymore. And then she had gone to that grave for a long time, for months and months on end, and the presence was always there, but she never acknowledged it. And then finally, at the end of the book, she acknowledges his presence and just says, Patroclus, what you want, basically. And then he speaks with her and tells her that he's really sorry that she never liked him, and he understands, but there is nothing and no one he would put above him, above Achilles, basically. And she finally sees the beautiful love the two of them had and puts his ashes with Achilles on the grave, and she writes his name into the stone because he can't rest until he has a name and a grave. And now he has a grave and a name, and she put him together with Achilles. And then basically the end of the book is like really mystical about how two energies in the dark or something, like there's just darkness and there's two bulbs of light and they merge together, and it's like the most wonderful thing ever. And it's basically the two souls finding together in the afterlife, and it's so beautiful. Like, the way I described it is not even close to how wonderful it's written. So please read it. It's full of tears, captivating, a hard book to put down. Yeah, a lot of stuff is on there. Somebody wrote sexy, dangerous, and mystical on this. Not wrong, but not wrong. I can definitely recommend this book by Madeline Miller, The Song of Achilles. Please read it. It's really good. Warning, it is pretty brutal. Like, there are very, very brutal scenes. There are some sex scenes. Men on men love, of course. If that bothers you, that's your problem. But it's very well written. I enjoyed this book immensely. And I overdid it a little bit with the video today. I hope you can forgive me, but I'm just very passionate about this book. And there's a lot of great details in it. And it's just beautifully written. Like, you feel like you're on the sun-scorched beach of Greece. Like, it feels like you're there. And it's very well written. I read this on vacation. I can definitely recommend a surrounding where it's hot and shady and you have some ocean. Beautiful. And that's exactly how this book feels when you read it. As you can see, I didn't take care of it that well. Like, got a little wet because it was in my beach bag, and that's on me. I should take better care of my books. Anyway, that's it for the day. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Have a great day, and next time we will check some other books that I've been reading. I hope you have a beautiful day, and see you next time.